I'm Dr. Diane Hamilton, and welcome to Curiosity, the key to innovation, engagement, and so much more that leads to productivity. It begins when we're children. Think about it. I love this picture. It's from the San Francisco Museum of Fine Art. These two little girls are looking behind the grape here instead of looking at the fine art on the wall, which they're supposed to be doing, right? And we do that when we're children. We don't do what is expected. We explore, we research, we think about things in a whole different way. And I think that when I look at this, I wonder what's behind that vent that they're looking at. What are they searching for? And when you're a kid, you all have this natural desire, but something happens. Either your parents say, get up, get off the floor, you're getting dirty, whatever it is. It gets to be to a point where we don't do those things anymore. And that's what I found really interesting, is what inhibits curiosity and how do we get it back? But let's go back to the beginning, because if you look at some of the research on creativity, it mimics what we see with curiosity. There's some great TED Talks from Sir Ken Robinson to George Land, you name it, you could find them on YouTube. They're wonderful. And they mimic what we saw with curiosity. Is around the age of 5, we get this peak of, wow, I'm super curious. And then it slowly declines to the point that it's barely there. And I was very interested in finding out, why does this happen and where does it go and how do we get it back, most importantly? So I think that if you look at some of this research, Sir Ken Robinson would say we educate ourselves out of our competencies. And George Land, he had a theory that sometimes we put on the gas and ask questions, but we put on the brake at the same time and over criticize. So there's a combination of things that limit us. And I wanted to delve more into that. So I'm going to share some of the things that I've learned. But first I want to tell you how I look at curiosity, because people often ask me, how do I define it? And you may be wondering why I have a picture of little girls baking here, but I'll get to that. Curiosity is not just about asking questions. It's about so much more. For me, it's about getting out of status quo thinking, but it's the spark to everything we're trying to do in the workplace. So think of it like baking a cake, like these ladies are doing here. They have what? Ingredients, right? They have flour, they have eggs, they have all these different things that they mix together. They put it into a pan, they put it in the oven. They want cake, right? Well, you only get cake if you turn on the oven. And the problem is in the workplace with curiosity, if you look at it like this, that the cake is productivity and money. That's what we want to have. And the ingredients, we know we need engagement, innovation, and all these communication issues, all these things. We're mixing all these ingredients together. We're putting it in the pan, we're putting it in the oven. Nobody's turning on the oven. And that oven, that spark, is curiosity. Now, I have a radio show in the United States where I interview top leaders throughout the world. And some of the people I've had on my show are listed on the slide. You see Daniel Goleman and some great other authors. Daniel is very famous for a book on emotional intelligence. My favorite one was about how your EQ, your emotional quotient from emotional intelligence, can matter more than your IQ. And when he was on my show, I talked to him about curiosity, and he claimed, and I agree, that curiosity is the key competency of the future. Why emotional intelligence is so important? It's that ability to understand your own emotions and those in others, and then act appropriately based on that recognition. And a lot of people have struggled with this, especially empathy, the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. This is what one site says of how much money we're losing in the United States. And most of my numbers are from the United States, since that's where I live. But it's tens of billions, if not more, that emotional intelligence leads to a lot of different issues that kind of tie into this next category of leadership, collaboration, and conflict. Again, tens of billions are lost every year from corporations that have issues with people not getting along. I had Francesca Gino and Amy Edmondson, which are two Harvard professors, on my show, and we talked about this. And Francesca Gino has a great article she wrote for HBR, and you can find that online, of making a case for curiosity. And what we found, in a lot of the research I had, was mimics what other researchers like these have found. A lot of leaders think they encourage curiosity, when in fact, if you ask their employees, was it encouraged? They say not so much. So there's a disconnect here of what we are really doing and what we need to be doing. And Amy did a great TED Talk on how we got the Chilean miners out from underneath that rock disaster. Now, that was an international kind of thing where all the people had to work together who had never worked together before. And they had to use their sense of curiosity to get over themselves, to become humble, to ask questions and work in a team that they've never worked with before. And that required being able to ask the questions that normally we would have not asked because maybe we thought, oh, those are stupid questions. But there are no stupid questions, as we know, right? And engagement is the huge number that you hear a lot. We have the Gallup survey every year here, and in the United States, we lose hundreds of billions. The organizations are getting killed by this lack of engagement, which is the sense of feeling like you have a desire to really do your job. And a lot of people are just walking dead, going to work, and just doing the same old thing. If you could ask a lot of questions about your job and explore different areas within the organization, you could be much more passionate about what you do, which would improve engagement. So you can see how curiosity ties into these things. Now, I want to share some organizations here and what they've done to be more curious. I've spoken for Verizon and went to New York, and we did these great videos for their organization where I talked a little bit about curiosity, and then they took employees who embodied curiosity and did a little video about them and combined them all and used them in their onboarding practices. They played these throughout all their stores throughout the United States, and they had it in just everywhere playing where their employees could all hear this. It was a way to make sure that they expressed their culture desire to have this curiosity-based culture. And that's so critical, especially hiring on new people. We want you to be curious. This is what we're showing you. This is what we value. And a lot of the reason there's a disconnect between what the leaders said they wanted and what employees really believe was leaders have to demonstrate, they have to embody this culture change that they want to show. And they did that with Verizon, and that was one of the ways they showed it. I also did some research with Novartis, which is a very large pharmaceutical company worldwide, and they're known for embracing curiosity. They actually pay their employees training if they can have, I think, 100 hours a year of free paid any kind of education, seminars, webinars, anything that they find interesting to increase their curiosity. They even had Curiosity Month, which I was one of the speakers. They had hundreds of us, I think, in September every year. We would come and we'd speak and people would learn. But they didn't just learn from speakers. They learned from their own employees. They had their employees create these little mini TED Talks. So like a TEDx salon kind of thing. And instead of bringing in speakers, these employees could teach whatever it is they found interesting. And that, to me, is one of the best ways to learn, is to teach, because I've taught thousands of classes, and I can tell you, you learn something every time you teach something. And SurveyMonkey is another very curious company. I had Zane Lurie on my radio show here, and he is the CEO that totally embraces curiosity. In fact, they changed their address to One Curiosity Way in Northern California because they work in surveys. I mean, everything they do is asking questions. So I love that. But some companies you might not think of are like Ben & Jerry's is an ice cream company. And you don't really think about ice cream companies as being super innovative, but they really are. They don't stick with the old ways of doing things. And as I said earlier, I see curiosity as getting out of status quo behaviors. What they do that I think is unique is they don't keep with an old flavor that maybe isn't particularly popular anymore. They don't try to make something fit that people don't want. Instead, they decide if people don't really want this flavor anymore, we'll put it to rest. And they actually have a grave site on their website, a little page that has little headstones that's, it's celebrating that this was a great flavor, but it was alive from this year to this year, and then we gave it a rest. And a lot of companies really need to do that. They need to give their products a rest, because when you hold on to the old ways of doing things, you get the Kodaks of the world that they were terrific. They had these great sales, and what worked so well, they just go, well, it worked so well in the past, let's just keep doing that. But then technology and other issues pass them by. And if they stick with that status quo instead of being curious to look for new ways, they're going to not exist. And that's why Ben & Jerry's is very innovative. Van Moof you might not recognize, but that is a hybrid bicycle company where they ship their bicycles, most of them, through the mail. And they were finding that their bicycles were getting damaged quite often, and they were very frustrated by this, wanted to solve this problem and not spend a lot of money doing it. So what they did was looked around and thought, well, we could double our box size, but then we're going to pay twice as much. They didn't want to do that. And they looked at all these different ways of doing things. Nothing seemed to be cost effective. Then they noticed that someone else was shipping in the same kind of container that they were. And it was actually a flat screen television company was doing this. And they thought, well, let's see how they're doing on their breakage. And they found that most of these TVs weren't breaking, but their bikes were. So they thought, well, what's different about their box than our box? And there wasn't. The only thing different about it was there was a picture of a flat screen TV on there, on the television box. So they decided, well, let's spend a couple pennies, see what happens if we print a flat screen TV on our box. Well, of course, it worked, which is great because people took better care of the boxes and they saved a ton of money from that. So thinking in a unique way, that's a curiosity. It's getting out of that status quo. This is what worked, so we have to continue doing that. Sometimes it's as easy as just going to your employees and asking them questions. And that's what Disney did. They had a lot of turnover in their laundry division. And you might think, well, laundry in any company is probably not a glamorous job. And it wasn't, even at Disney. So they went to their employees and asked them, how can we make your job better? Simple question. And they kind of expected to get back stuff like, buy me a new car kind of things that wouldn't really help. But they did get back things that were very helpful. They got back suggestions like put a vent over my head so I'm not so hot. Make my table go up and down so my back doesn't hurt. And they dramatically improved turnover. And something as simple as going to employees and asking questions like that, you would be surprised how little it happens, or if it does, they don't utilize a lot of the suggestions. So we need to do more of that. A company that you might not be aware of, or you might, there's a hospital in London that was experiencing a high number of casualties when after a surgery, they would be transported from the OR to recovery. And they were going through all the typical things that you go through to make sure that everybody's well, and nothing seemed to make any difference. So again, they were relying on the status quo lists and checklists and all that kind of thing. And then one night, a couple of the executives were watching a Formula One race car event, and the Ferrari team was doing this amazing pit stop where they, take it all apart and put it back together in 7 seconds kind of turnover. And they watch that and they go, how can they do that without any problems? And we can't just move a patient from here to here. So they actually had them come in, the Ferrari race car team came into the hospital and gave them, watched them, see what they did, and gave them several suggestions about how they could communicate better and dramatically improved their survival rate. So sometimes it's getting outside of our cubicle, outside of our silo, and just getting out into other industries. And a lot of people forget to do that. But not just big company ideas, there's product ideas, like Monopoly was a huge product, and Velcro was a huge product. And some of these things came about by accident. The Velcro came about from a guy walking his dog. It got furs in its hair and he couldn't get it out. And he thought, that's interesting. Let me look at how it works. And then he saw the hook and eye kind of way that this burr worked, and he created Velcro. But Monopoly, say they already had Monopoly, and they kept coming up with these new editions of this board game. And, they had Cat Monopoly and Dog Monopoly and Star Wars and Star Trek and all these monopolies. And they were great, but they didn't do that much business as they'd like. So what they did was they researched how people played Monopoly. And they found that 50% of people who play Monopoly cheat. I'm sure none of you watching this, but because there were so many people who cheated, they came out with the Cheaters Edition, where they had a little handcuff for the board and you kind of got rewarded for cheating. And it's a completely different, cute take on the game. And it was their second biggest launch since they launched the initial game. So by being curious, these are great examples of how these organizations are improving things. But to improve curiosity, you have to figure out what inhibits it. And that's where my research came in. For thousands of people over many years, I researched this, and I found there are 4 things that inhibit it, which are fear, assumptions, technology, and environment. And I want to touch on these because I think that they're so critical to understand, because if you can recognize these factors, you get this self-awareness that's a big part of emotional intelligence, which leads to a lot of the things we're trying to improve. So I want to touch on each one of these because I think that it's so critical to recognize how much fear, assumptions, technology, and environment, fate, to help you remember it easier, impacts it. Fear is that sense that, well, nobody wants to look stupid, right? We all want to not ask that question that makes it look like we weren't prepared, that we failed at something. We've all had leaders who maybe said things that made us feel small if we did ask it. And, there's all this background baggage that we have that can lead to this sense of fear. In the past, we used to tell people, don't come to me with problems unless you have solutions, because we thought we got rid of whiners by doing that, or complainers, right? But if you do things like that, you inadvertently tell people, I don't want to know about things that you can't fix. But if they might not be able to fix things, they might be able to recognize things. So we do want them to come to us with problems. If they have solutions, great. But if they don't, please still tell us about the problems, right? And so the things that we said maybe had good intentions as leaders, but sometimes they can cut people off. I think that mostly you sit in these meetings and you look at people and you have these ideas and you think, well, if I ask it, I don't want to be the only one thinking this. So you might lean next to the person next to you and say, hey, Bob, why don't you ask this question? Because you'd rather have them look dumb, right? You don't want to be the one. But if you have a leader who embraces the sense that no question's a dumb question, that it changes the whole culture. People feel more confident. They will ask the questions. And those questions are probably held by a number of people in the room. Assumptions. Assumptions really is that voice in your head that tells you you're not going to be interested in something. Well, I did it in the past. It wasn't that great. I didn't like that instructor. It was kind of boring. Or if I ask a question, they're just going to make me the head of that committee and not pay me for it. I mean, there's so many thoughts in our heads, and those thoughts can lead to the fear. And a lot of these things can overlap. But a lot of thoughts, I kind of put it this way. Sometimes I'll hold up a bottle of water. I'll hold up something like this and I'll say, how much does this weigh? And people in the audience might yell out 8 ounces or 10 ounces or that whatever amount. And I'll say, it doesn't matter. What matters is how long I hold it. If I hold it for a minute, no big deal. Hold it for an hour, my arm gets tired. Hold it all day, my arm's basically paralyzed. That's how it is with our thoughts. A fleeting thought, no big deal. You hold on to it, it kind of inhibits us. You really hold on to it, it paralyzes you. So we have to recognize the things that we're telling ourselves. And then technology was surprising to me that came out as a factor. And what was interesting to me about that is it's over and underutilization of it. Sometimes, you could be the greatest mathematician in the world. If I threw you a calculator, didn't teach you the basics behind it, then you're just the greatest calculator worker in the world, maybe. But we want you to know both. We want you to know the foundation behind things and the technology. So you need to have high tech and low tech days to get foundational and then take it to the best next level. So a lot of people find this overwhelming. They don't ever really get caught up on the first training, and there's a new training, and you have to make sure that everybody's keeping up. And I think a lot of companies let people fall behind, and that's problematic. And then environment. Environment really is everybody you've ever known in your life, from your parents, your teachers, your siblings, your friends, your coworkers, your last boss, current boss, social media, you name it, anybody with whom you've had any interactions, because what people say really can impact us. If your teacher didn't have time to teach you, as in Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk, we're teaching ourselves out of our competencies because maybe we're teaching too much STEM and maybe not enough creative, curious kind of things. Or your parents maybe always expected you to go into this business, or the family always does this, or your siblings think that's a stupid thing to do. You have those kinds of things that go on in your head, which lead to your assumptions, which lead to your fear. All these things can interact. So that was what I was finding fascinating. And that's why I took a look at how it changes for men and for women as well. This is not my data, but it mimics a lot of the data that I did see. This comes from Cambridge, and it's got a great outlook of why men and women are a little bit different here. They surveyed people who had watched a live seminar, and they saw that the differences between men and women were men are 2.5 times more likely to ask questions than women, and women really like to have a lot of questions out there before they raise their hand. Women tend to think that if there's maybe a typo on the slide, that it was them and that wasn't the person's typo, that maybe they misread it, where a man might say, hey, you got a typo up there. So we're different. And I think it's important to know that we're different. So when you're communicating with someone who maybe holds back on asking questions, some of it could be gender related. But in my research, it was very similar for men and women. But what I found with women, which I really found fascinating, because I do speak to some women's groups sometimes, is this is from the Fortune 500 top list of women in the United States and what they believed made them successful. I actually added the last two on here because a lot of people recognize Oprah Winfrey and Mae Jemison, who was the first African-American woman astronaut. And when you ask them what made them successful, look at their answers. They're all curiosity related. Ask questions and listen. Curiosity, openness. Openness to experience is really a big part of the big 5 factors, which is a very famous personality theory. Curiosity, challenging the status quo. Go down the list. It's really all about building curiosity to build empathy, which is a big part of emotional intelligence, to be able to communicate well, to be a success. So how can you do this? Now, when I train companies, I go to them and we do some of these things, and I'll share with you how we go through this. But basically, you learn the factors of how much fear, assumptions, technology, and environment have impacted you. I have people take an assessment, and that assessment gives them 36 answers. It's kind of like taking a personality test, like a DISC or Myers-Briggs or something like that, where you can look at your different results. Based on that, then you can create a personal kind of SWOT analysis. And a SWOT, of course, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So if you look at your weaknesses and threats, then you come up with SMART goals, measurable, attainable type of goals to overcome these weaknesses and threats. Now, we do this in the trainings that I do. We do it for individuals until everybody really has a good idea of what's holding them back from their curiosity, and they've built a plan to move forward. But then in the second half of the training, I work with organizations to do the organization overall issues. So let's say there's problems with communication, engagement, innovation, you name it. The employees in these classes are really great because they take these issues for the organization that are problematic, and they give their insight, kind of like how Disney went back and asked their employees, how can we make your job better? Well, that's what they're doing here. They're giving insight. This is how you can make the company better by building curiosity. And we whiteboard all these different ideas and come up with suggestions for the organization. So this is something that you can do, but I think, you don't have to be in a formal training class or take my formal assessment to do this. Today, starting today, look at these action items. Fear, ask yourself, why don't you ask questions in meetings? Why not? Why could you? What could you do? What could you write down to help yourself of how to ask maybe a couple more questions that you normally wouldn't ask? Let's take baby steps to get to the big questions. Assumptions. What do you tell yourself won't interest you? And why? Where's that coming from? When you can recognize what it is that you're telling yourself and why, is it coming from a family member, what they said in the past? Is it coming from teachers never directed you that way? A bad experience? It's recognizing it and making a plan to overcome it. And then technology. Do you ever over or underutilize it? Where could you have high-tech days, low-tech days to catch up? And environment. Who told you what you cared about didn't matter? A lot of people do that, especially social media, right? So we have to think about this and then look at the issues on the bottom. If you're in the leadership position, these are the things that are impacted by curiosity. And it's just a short list of the things. These are the things that we can talk to our employees about to get to the next level, to get out of that status quo way of doing things. because the future belongs to the curious, the ones who are not afraid to try it, explore it, poke at it, question it, and set it free. I really enjoyed sharing this information with you. I hope that this has been helpful to you to understand how curiosity can get you out of status quo thinking. You can go to developcuriosity.com and take a free curiosity course if you'd like. This course is based on my book. I put a lot of the free chapters in there, so you don't have to buy my book or buy anything. It's all free. And it gives you a great insight as to how to develop curiosity. FutureLearn also offers a free course that I created, and that's an international kind of course. And if you go to FutureLearn and look up curiosity, you can find that course. There's several places you can go to get more information, but I hope you enjoyed this, and I was really excited to speak to you today. Thank you so much for joining us, and feel free to contact me at drdianehamilton.com is my website, or follow me on social media at Dr. Diane Hamilton.